You mentioned really early on in your context that there's a lot of kind of a lot of growing force against transitional justice, against human rights. And I was wondering, so I come from Sri Lanka, and I would say that definitely that the political will is not particularly for, very, very positive towards transitional justice. And I was wondering, so in a context like that, where your political will and maybe even your kind of majority of your population sees it as a negative thing almost, how do you work towards these objectives? And indeed, can you really achieve everything that you set out to if you don't have democratic backing for it?
Very, very important, very good question. And my book and my research indirectly answers, or almost implicitly answers this question, which, amongst other things, tries to show that transitional justice, like most other processes, is not static, is not fixed. It's not what Huntington, the big scholar from the 90s, still, of course, but in the 90s, he wrote, amongst others, that if justice doesn't come early in the process, it doesn't come at all. So if you don't, in the transition, if you don't start with persecution, you can basically forget about it. I guess what my research, amongst other things, and of course there is a lot of other research out there that would show that this is in reality not necessarily the case. Even if you look only at this narrow question of prosecution and accountability, you cannot assume that the absence of the political will now will be also the situation. It's common sense, but oftentimes forgotten. What is important, however, if you are on the side of the transitional justice promoters and those who want to have this materialized, that you work on the foundation, the building blocks, the basis upon which transitional justice measures could be built. We talked earlier about truth-seeking, documentation. These are typically measures that are considered overall to be less controversial. That even when there is not enough political will to do something more ambitious, that there could be, either by support from international actors, donors, or on the local level, will to engage in an exercise like that. And as far as I know, Sri Lanka is one of those countries that has done partly that process. So that could provide a good basis, foundation to later on find a moment when there will be a window of opportunity for NGOs and human rights workers to engage with the relevant actors to push for a particular measure. And by the way, it doesn't have to be, again, persecution only. As discussed also with Rudina, the experience with prosecution has shown time and again that it's not always easy to implement it properly. It will remain contentious. I'm not arguing against, but all I want to say is that there are other avenues that could perhaps be explored. But what is important, and this to tie it back to other questions, is that whatever is happening, that it is reflective of the desires and wishes of the population. Otherwise, and now we're speaking of the normative side of things, otherwise there will be never full legitimacy for those measures if you don't do that on a demand sort of basis.